Yes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we are close to the start of college football. And if you've been keeping up with Ryan Beef Coyle's countdown, Beef, where we at?
81 days from today, we will have Georgia Tech, Florida State kicking off over in Ireland, just as it should be.
Just as it should be. Hello, everyone. This is the show on all things college football, getting you ready. We're calling this one Summer Ball, episode 1. Yeah, we worked hard on that one. Anyways, allow me to introduce the big brains, as always, covering all things college football for us here on The Gambler. Joe Tansey, JTansey90 on socials, our returning champion. We got Ryan Beef Coyle, Beef up front, coming back for another season. Also a legendary tailgate fast approaching as well. And the co-host, of the Tough Cover radio show, as Sean Menard does a great job with you, Mark Henry Jr. joining us here. Gentlemen, no kidding. It really is here. I know baseball is here, and of course, NBA finals will be starting one of these nights. I don't know when. We got Stanley Cup hockey, of course, Caitlin Clark, everything with the WNBA. But come on, man, all that's going to be pushed to the side once football gets here. So it's important for everybody to get caught up on everything that's going down in college football. And Joe, I'm going to start with you on this one. Of course, I want to get everybody's take, but man, the realignment is happening. It's real. We joked about before the show here that Oklahoma and Texas, the SEC, has been discussed for a long dang time, which is true. But how about this Big Ten conference that's getting pushed together with USC, and all of a sudden I got a Penn State game in the middle of October where USC and Penn State are going at it at noon, I believe, which would be a 9 o'clock kick or a 9 a.m. kick for Penn State, of course, but being played out there. But conference realignment to you, Joe Tansey. I want to start here. What does it mean?
Doesn't mean anything anymore. I mean, honestly, it couldn't mean less. I mean, I'm still going to sit in front of my computer for 12 hours on a Saturday and watch college football. It means, I mean, I guess the conferences change, the teams in those conferences change, but to me, it really doesn't matter. Like, I think people at the start of this whole thing, when the Big Ten and the SEC, when Missouri and Texas A&M got folded in the SEC and Rutgers and Maryland in the Big Ten, and the ACC became bigger. People tried to scare you off, but nobody's going to watch college football anymore. That is probably the biggest lie anyone's ever said about realignment. People are still going to watch college football. Like, really, all it's going to come down to is, this team's in a different conference now. There's a 12-team playoff now. And once you get used to that, it just is what it is. I mean, it's basically what it is at this point. We have four big conferences. We got a group of 5, and that's it. I don't know. I'm numb to it. I really don't care because it's still college football. And if anything, the games are going to get much better when you look at it from an entire season's perspective. If you like tradition, I get it. But, I mean, you mentioned USC, Penn State. I mean, it doesn't get more traditional than that. Right? With in terms of college football programs, you want to see that more. I don't want to see USC play Cal. I don't want to see Penn State play Illinois. You know what I mean? Like, those games mean nothing to me. So, I mean, on the surface of it, yeah, if you like tradition and you don't like things changing, sure, whatever, it's not your thing. But the people who say that are still going to sit down and watch their team play college football. No one's boycotting college football because of realignment. That's a lie that somebody concocted on the internet 10 years ago, and nobody's ever followed through with it.
No, you're right. I am definitely one of those that will be, a little frustrated. I will get over it. I will watch the games, and next year I won't think twice about the history. And,
by October 1st, you won't think twice.
I disagree. It's each their own. Like, you've definitely been on that from day one with the realignment, and but money talks, and it's ruining everything as far as sports, or it's changing everything. Ruining, we'll discuss at a later time. Changing everything in professional sports, college sports, you name it, all that. Mark Henry Jr., realignment to you, what does it mean?
Yeah, I feel like so much of the talk is about realignment, but to me, what I think about realignment doesn't really matter. It's here, and I have to deal with it. And that's is there traditions that we're going to miss out on? Sure. Is there cool matchups that we never got before? Sure. But ultimately, the thing that has my eye about all of this is I'm so far past realignment and trying to think about what a season with 12 playoff spots looks like. Like going into the last week, the last couple weeks of the regular season, how many teams really had a chance the last couple of years to make the playoff? Maybe 8? Like if there's 2 weeks left in the season, maybe there's 6 to 8 teams that have a legitimate chance of getting into the playoff, and we're coming up with chaos scenarios for the 8th or 9th team or whatever. Now, in this 12-team scenario with the conference auto bids up top, we're going to have like 18 to 22 teams towards the end of the year vying for those spots. It's going to make a lot more games matter instead of being like, oh, well, the only game today that matters is the one at 3:30. Guess what? There's going to be a lot more games that matter throughout the whole year.
No, you're right about that. There's no denying. Does that mean all questions, back to you, Mark Henry Jr., does that mean all playoff questions will be solved from here on out? We won't have any issues with team 13, 14, 15, 16? Is 12 teams?
I mean, we still complain about the 68-team college basketball playoff, but ultimately, I think it's a little bit different. Does anybody really care about the 69th team that's snubbed out of the college basketball playoff once Thursday tips off? I mean, me and Tansey were talking about it this year after. What's up?
Besides Virginia this year.
Virginia, yeah. Well, we were upset when someone got in. We weren't really crying for any one specific team. We were like crying for the Big East, I guess. But, well, I mean, once the games tip off, and even for me, once I have the bracket in my hand, I've got nothing else to – like, I'm not worried about who got snubbed anymore. So, yeah, there will be when Texas A&M goes 10-2 and, Oregon goes 10-2 and they get in from the Big Ten instead of the SEC team getting in, will they be upset? Will people be upset? Sure. Does it really matter?
I also think it's different than college basketball because in college football, you have – I mean, we've been arguing about the fifth or sixth best team in college football for how many years now, right? There's still elite programs. My take the whole college basketball season, at least this year, is the bubble is a little overrated. We're talking about the 69th best team in the country. But now we're kind of arguing about the 12th or 13th best team because remember that 12th team is the group of 5, best group of 5 teams. So we're really talking about the best 11 teams in the country plus the group of 5 team. I personally don't really care if 2-loss Ole Miss or 2-loss Penn State. Actually, for my personal well-being, I do care about that scenario. But you get what I'm saying. The 2-loss teams in the SEC and the Big Ten, they're going to have so many opportunities to win and put themselves in the top 11 or lose themselves out of the playoff, where I think it kind of just settles. I really look, we'd like to argue about pretty much everything on the internet. So there's going to be people that are mad. But I predict we'll see a lot less outrage with 11 power conference teams getting into a playoff than 4. I think it's going to be, if you're a 2-loss team and you had your opportunities, say if you're Oregon or Washington, for example, I mean, how many opportunities do you need in the Big Ten to prove yourself? I think it's going to be much more of a merit-based system. And I think maybe this year, because we're not getting used to it, maybe there's an adjustment process, but I think, in a year or two from now, we're not really going to complain about who's the 12th best power conference team in the country because, I mean, there's 11 teams better than you. You probably should have done something to change that.
Yep. And I love the 12-team playoff because that's obviously going to figure it all out. Who's ever standing at the end has proved their worth. Oh, by the way, last year's scenario, 12 was Oklahoma, 13 LSU, 14 Arizona, 15 Louisville, 16 Notre Dame. So,
I wouldn't want to see any of those teams in the playoff. Sorry.
Hard to argue, except for Notre Dame, because Mark.
Maybe Arizona.
Jaden Daniels with LSU at the end of the year last year, and
they weren't a good team.
No, I know, but they could have been it would have been at least a fun playoff game with the 5 team. Jaden Daniels he would have put up like 45 on anybody. But Beef made a great point. Arizona was really good at the end of last year. Yeah, for sure.
Beef, over to you, Ryan. Beef Coyle. Of course, Beef up front. We did the podcast all last year. Got the great tailgate coming up here. Looking forward to rocking out with your gang at the Phillies Game Fest approaching here. But Ryan, what does a conference realignment mean to you in college football?
So the one thing that I'm upset about, I guess, with it, I think it's week 2 this year, Texas going to Michigan. Like, you're not going to get games like that going forward, big time non-conference games, because why schedule them? What's the benefit when you have these loaded conferences now? But then in exchange, I think I was talking to you about it about a month ago, Brace. I was looking at some schedules. It's like you get Wisconsin and Oregon in like November. Like, that's like an awesome game between two teams that could be competing for one of those 8 to 12 spots maybe this year, something like that. So I think you're going to get more, big games late and more games like Mark, you were saying, that really do matter, where it's not like, oh, we already had 1 or 2 losses early, we're kind of screwed. No, these teams are going to have a lot more shelf life, but people are also going to say, well, then that was also the beauty of college football, that every single game mattered. But you're going to get some really awesome college football matchups in the conference play in November and December. You're just probably not going to get as many great matchups at the beginning of the season in the non-conference. But, you take one, you give one in that kind of scenario. But I think it's going to make for a lot better football down the stretch, because you're not going to be sitting there watching Purdue Rutgers. You're going to be focused more in on a Wisconsin versus Oregon with real stakes on the line.
I'll throw this little wrinkle in there too. So the top 4 teams obviously get through into they get the buys.
Don't get me started, Joe Tansey.
Yep.
So I'm going to just use some foresight here. It's June 4th. You can save this for about November 24th. If you're on the bubble of 4 and 5 and you want a home playoff game, would you rather have a home playoff game or a week off? Well, I guarantee you that's going to be the debate that happens mid-November. Would you rather be the 5 seed, host a playoff game, keep going with your season, or be one of the top 4 seeds, play on neutral sites the rest of the way, because it's the New Year's 6 bowls that are hosting the quarters and the semis? What would you rather? I'm not saying we don't have to answer that now, but I guarantee you, come mid-November, that will be a debate when it comes to 4, 5, 6.
You want to be
First
top
time
4.
I'm hearing it.
I'm taking the bye, because you still got to win the game.
I'm taking the bye, but come on. We know how the internet works. There's going to be some wahoos out there that think having the 5 seed and play. And also, I think the caveat here is playing the home game against the best group of 5 team. You're not playing a power conference team.
The biggest thing is injuries now. And that's actually going to be an interesting part of the playoff that wasn't really a thing before. Depth matters so much more now, because they're going to play, multiple big games instead of just 2. It's just a longer playoff. So I think it almost, in a certain degree, it's almost going to help the Georgias and the Ohio States that are able to have these like position rooms full of 5 stars, where if one guy goes down, they have another guy to step up. Whereas a team like Washington last year has such star players leading the way. If 1 or 2 of those guys went down, they would have really, really been screwed. I almost think the longer playoff helps the top teams a little bit more, but I don't know. That's kind of crazy.
All right, let's keep it moving. Question number 2, Summer Ball episode 1 here. Mark Henry Jr., I'm going to come to you on this one to start, because I texted you probably a month ago with this question, and I think it's got to be extremely important, especially with this day and age and the portal. I'm going to throw a little extra wrinkle in here. So give me the team, boys. I'm going to start with Mark first. Give me the team that you think has done extremely well in the portal, and we maybe raise expectations or continued their winning ways, whatever it may be. And the one most important player you think right now that has transferred. And look, whether it's the most important or the most important position, because I think a lot of people would probably say Sam Hartman last year was the number 1 guy, at least going into the season. Quarterback, played really well at Wake Forest, goes to Notre Dame, had an automatic impact or instant impact for the Irish. So is there a guy out there that's going to be like that caliber? Is there a quarterback that's, and again, the team wise as well? Mark Henry Jr., your thoughts?
I think if I was going with a team, I think the team that did the best is probably Ohio State, going and getting Will Howard to come in and play quarterback. I think that's just such a massive upgrade on what they had last year with McCord. And then not to mention, you bring in Quinshon Judkins.
That's the answer, by the way.
Yeah. It's Judkins and Howard, the combo of them going to Ohio State. But if I was saying just the single most impactful transfer, and I'll put the hat I already have on already. I do think Riley Leonard's the best transfer quarterback that changed teams. Because initially there was rumors that Will Howard was going to Notre Dame. I can't lie, I'm not the biggest Will Howard guy. Not having just said that, I think it's a massive upgrade for Ohio State on McCord, and I think he'll look great in that system. But I was a lot happier to learn once it was Riley Leonard than Will Howard. What he was able to do at Duke, and almost the biggest thing with that is Notre Dame's offensive coordinator last year was Sam Hartman, and part of the reason that I think he was a little bit disappointing was because their offensive coordinator Tommy Rees went to Alabama last year and ended up making Jalen Milroe a top-notch quarterback. They had promoted their tight ends coach to offensive coordinator. He got fired after last year's terrible offense. We brought in LSU's offensive coordinator, stole him from Brian Kelly, brought him back to Notre Dame. He was the guy who was at the helm for Jaden Daniels' Heisman season there at LSU. So just as important as Leonard coming to Notre Dame is an OC coming with him. So, I mean, it's not just bias. Notre Dame has the fourth best odds to make the playoff. And a lot of that has to do with the schedule, but it's because of Riley Leonard.
Excellent stuff there. Ryan Beef Coyle, over to you. Same question.
I really like, from a team perspective, especially on the offensive side of the ball, what Miami was able to do. Bringing in Cam Ward there at quarterback, he was one of my favorite players over these past couple years there at Wazoo, and he actually declared for the draft. And it was funny because he was just like a 5-second video of him like sitting on a couch and said, "I'm declaring for the draft." And then a couple weeks later, wound up withdrawing from the draft. Miami gets him, and then to pair with him, they got arguably behind Judkins the best running back, I think, that entered the portal in Martinez from Oregon State. Yeah, Damian Martinez. He was one of the best running backs in the country last year as well. So that's a really good 1-2 punch behind what's probably going to be a really good offensive line. But from an individual player perspective, I'm going to have to go with Dylan Gabriel. When I was going through some of this, where the fact that him and KJ Jefferson are still playing college football for what it feels like is 7th or 8th year now is pretty wild. But I think Dylan Gabriel is in a perfect spot to go in there and basically just pick up where Bo Nix led off. And Bo Nix, I think, going into that Pac-12 championship game, 2nd or 3rd on the Heisman odds, was I believe he was one of the finalists at the end. But he had a really good 2-year run there. I think Dylan Gabriel is plenty good enough at the college level to go out there and do just that, and have Oregon right there in the playoff picture yet again. But I'd say Oregon with getting Gabriel, and then Miami from a team perspective, what they were able to add on offense with some firepower and a big-time year for Mario Cristobal. I think those were 2 big-time pickups.
That is a Big Ten Oregon Duck squad, too. Let's just make sure we're correct on that one. Also, plus 210 on DraftKings to win their conference, only behind Ohio State, plus 160. So I think odds makers are in agreement with you that the quarterback play, is it going to drop off at all in your mind from the way you're reading the odds there, Beef?
I think Gabriel slides right in there. And also another caveat to what Mark was saying about depth. They added Dante Moore, who was the number 1, I think, quarterback 2 years ago coming out of his class. He played last year at UCLA, and now he transferred out to Oregon. So if something did happen to Gabriel, they have a guy who had, he didn't start every game at UCLA last year, but probably played in about 8 or 9 games, had a lot of starting experience. If something does happen to Gabriel, who hasn't been the healthiest player during his college career, hence why he's there for year number 9, Dante Moore could step in as well. So I like what they have in the quarterback room.
I know my guy Shane Haff is in Oklahoma. He's an Oklahoma fan. He hates Dylan Gabriel, and we've always argued about it because I think Dylan Gabriel's pretty solid. It's going to be interesting to see him in that Oregon system because he's a little different than Nix, where Nix is so accurate and so like pinpoint, and that's his whole thing. Whereas Gabriel uses his legs a lot more, and he's kind of a little bit of a screen merchant, as Shane Haff would say. But it's going to be interesting if there's any situation that would be good for a quarterback to go to. The situation that took Bo Nix from being a joke into being a Heisman candidate. Oregon's minus 240 to make.
By the way, a top 12 pick too, and
first round draft pick
as well.
That's unreal.
Quickly on Gabriel, just fast on this: 30 touchdowns passing last season, only 6 interceptions, 69% completion percentage, over 3,600 yards, and then rushing. Had 12 touchdowns rushing last season for the Sooners, 93 carries, 373 yards. Joe Tansey, same question, sir. Team and player.
None of these quarterbacks do anything for me. I'll be totally honest with you. Will Howard, Riley Leonard, They do nothing for me. Like the reason Ohio State is going to improve this year is not because of their quarterback. Sure, it's an upgrade from Kyle McCord, but I think anything was an upgrade from Kyle McCord in that system. But the pieces they brought around him and that they've recruited and kept. Remember, a lot of those guys stayed as well. So I think that's an important note. It's going to be a very good mixture of guys that have stayed and guys that they really fished. I mean, Judkins had no reason to leave Ole Miss. And they just threw the bag at him with NIL money. But Howard does really nothing for me at quarterback. Neither does Riley Leonard. I mean, Notre Dame's just doing the exact same thing they did last year, right? They're just tossing it, who they thought was one of the best ACC quarterbacks into their system and hoping it works. I don't know. Look, Duke was a great story, but if you were to rank quarterbacks last year, I don't know, Riley Leonard, I think maybe barely scratches the top 10, if that.
Yeah, I totally disagree with everything Tansey just said, to be quite honest.
Well, I mean, look at the hat you're wearing.
Actually, it has less to do with that. So your point on Ohio State being better is the pieces around the quarterback. Travion Henderson rushed for 6 yards a carry, and they had Marvin Harrison Jr. I don't think the pieces around are what's really going to be the difference. The difference is the upgrade from McCord to Howard. So I actually have a bigger problem with that statement. But yeah, of course. I mean, Riley Leonard had a 3,000-yard season, 20 touchdowns, 6 picks at Duke. And the difference is last year we had a tight end coach who had never been an offensive coordinator calling plays. This year we had the guy who was the offensive coordinator for the best college offense in the country last year.
I mean, to be fair, anybody can throw for 3,000 yards in college football now.
Okay, I don't know what to say.
I mean that's if you
so
see
what's the point of
if you just tell me a quarterback throws
if
you tell me a quarterback throws for 3,000 yards in college where that's the most important position, they just pass heavy, like cool, he did that. So did Sam Hartman. So did
I think if you were to
so
look
many
up
other quarterbacks that didn't make it
in the country, Leonard's in the top 15 on any list you look at.
I'd give him 15. I wouldn't give him 10.
Is he healthy? Is he 100% ready to go? Right?
I'm not a doctor. I can't speak to that. I don't know. But I think saying he does nothing for you. Same with Will Howard. Like
personally, they don't do anything for me. They don't. I don't see them as like they're not up on my marquee of quarterbacks. And by the way, we've gone through this transfer talk and we haven't even talked about what Texas did at wide receiver. I mean, they just went in and raided Kalen DeBoer's cabinet in Tuscaloosa and brought in Isaiah Bond and Mari Niblack. Like, we talk about like wanting to load up in the SEC with a veteran quarterback in Quinn Ewers, and the number 2 spot in the SEC is there for the taking, right? If Alabama is going to be vulnerable, it's going to be this year in the transition from Nick Saban to Kalen DeBoer. I'm not saying it's going to happen. Alabama could very much be Alabama, but to take 2 of their best receivers and throw them in an offense that clearly has had a ton of success under Sarkisian, and with Quinn Ewers being able to get this offense going from the start, I think when you look at maybe in the long run of the season, the transfer quarterbacks end up making the biggest difference, but immediately they won't. It's going to be the receivers at Texas. It's going to be Caleb Downs at Ohio State. We haven't even mentioned him. He was the best player in the transfer portal. It's going to be Judkins at Ohio State. I mean, this is a guy that has been one of the best running backs in college football since he entered the collegiate level at Ole Miss. I mean, Evan Stewart, 5-star recruit from A&M, now at Oregon. We just talked about what the Oregon offense is going to do with Dylan Gabriel / Dante Moore, whatever ends up working there. That's huge. I mean, I look at some of these running backs, and I'm so much more intrigued by what a Trevor Etienne does at Georgia, what Rocket Sanders does at South Carolina. I know South Carolina's not supposed to be that good, but still he's one of the more underrated players in the SEC. Woody Marks going from Mississippi State to USC. Like, these are impact players that I think if you go so far beneath the quarterback, and heck, even Caden Proctor, he's not – do we classify him as a transfer? Because he just pit stopped in Iowa for about 3 weeks and then decided to U-turn back to Tuscaloosa. But him staying at Alabama and deciding not to transfer is a big deal in the context of the start of Alabama's season. So I think when you broaden this thing out outside of the quarterbacks, again, maybe in December we're sitting here talking about guys making more of a difference at quarterback. But I think the other position players on offense, plus a Caleb Downs, plus Caden Proctor, he's not really a transfer, but he transferred in, transferred back out. Those are the guys I think that make the immediate impact, because I think when you rank them on the internet, they're far more better individual players than a Will Howard or a Riley Leonard or a Cam Ward. And I like Cam Ward, but Miami, until Cristobal proves he can do something, Miami doesn't move the needle no matter who their personnel.
I'm back on Tansey's side.
Now back with Tansey on that one.
Mario Cristobal slanders always a way to get me back.
Let me follow up, and for the group, is it just money, right? Like, because you look at what you just discussed right there, and a lot of people out there probably aren't up on Quishon Judkins, who went to Ohio State, but we are up on Ole Miss and the SEC and the recent success that Lane's been able to put together there, right? Like, they look like they were building something. How did they lose a player like that caliber? Is it just simply Ohio State threw the bag at them?
Well, Ohio State had to throw the bag at everybody. I mean, look at the way they finished their season, and that's the dynamic.
But Ole Miss doesn't have money to match.
Well, Ole Miss had the number one overall portal class, so they might have just allocated resources elsewhere. I think Judkins was also pretty close to going to the draft. I think it might have just been he didn't want to be at Ole Miss anymore, but I wouldn't say that losing him was the end all be all, because they did wind up getting the number one overall portal class.
I will say he's closer to winning a national championship at Ohio State than he is at Ole Miss. Yeah. I mean, that's also part of it. I mean,
so there's something to be said about the player as well.
I'm sure
it's also interesting because he's probably going to split carries too, which was a bit of a head scratcher for me with Henderson.
But in that case, if you want to break it down, it's probably a money thing. But I mean, when you look at, again, this kind of goes big picture to how we are in college football now. So Ohio State could not have been more embarrassed, right, at the end of the season. Not just losing to Michigan and being little brother in that rivalry, but the bowl game. I mean, they couldn't put a competent quarterback that could throw more than 5 yards out there against Missouri. So it's complete and total embarrassment on the national stage for Ohio State. So instead of just hitting the recruiting trail and saying we have 10 to 12 five-star players coming in, now you can say, NIL backers, here's what we need. Let's go out and buy these guys. Because Kyle McCord was cut. Like, let's be honest. He was cut. The second their season ended, he was cut. They said, we no longer need your services. We're going to go out and find quarterbacks that are better than you that will pay more. And I'm sure he'll do okay at Syracuse. That whole rebuilding process is what it is. But Ohio State specifically, the athletic department was like, okay, we want to go back to where we were. Let's throw the bag at everybody we can. But I think it is obviously money driven, but I think it's also situation specific. Like Ole Miss, the reason why they're so aggressive in the transfer portal is because where's Ole Miss been in the rankings since Lane's got there? Consistently 10, 11. Well, now 10, 11 gets you in the playoff. 10, 11 used to get you in like the Citrus Bowl. Now 10, 11 means more. So if you're Ole Miss, if you're in that context, you're perfectly okay with being the number 3, number 4 team in the SEC, because that means you get to the college football playoff. It doesn't matter what seed you are. It matters that you're in there, that Ole Miss is in there, and you're with the Alabamas and the Ohio States and the Michigans of the world. So I think it really is situation dependent, but those two I think specifically stand out because Ohio State needed a roster retool, and Ole Miss knows exactly. They're smart. Lane Kiffin's very smart. He knows exactly what the future of college football is, and if you're in that fringe range of if you've been anywhere from 8 to 14, or expanded to like 18 or whatever, if you've been second to third best in your conference for the last 5 years, why not go out and be aggressive with your NIL money? Because at minimum, if you finish top 11, you're in the playoff. You might even get a home playoff game, which, by the way, I know we mentioned it earlier and I joked about that being a topic. But if these teams like an Ole Miss, like a Penn State, if they're hosting a playoff game, you know where that money goes?
Yeah, of course.
That's at least an extra $2 to $3 million in revenue that you can pump right back into your program in NIL, and how many players does that get you? Like it's a whole system. And these guys, I know we make fun of them for being like really stupid, larger than life characters. Some of them are really smart. And I think that's what Kiffin at Ole Miss is.
You know who's more happy about the playoff than anybody?
James Franklin.
Yeah, it's James Franklin. But yeah, you mentioned Ole Miss. It's the perfect Ole Miss, Notre Dame, and Penn State are like the three teams that are licking their chops. They're like, we go 10-2 every year, like no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're crapping on Notre Dame what they did last year, and I was incredibly disappointed. They went 10-3, like in a bad season for them, and finished 14th. Like if you miss the playoffs now for at any year, if you're Penn State, if you're Notre Dame, it's a failure.
Yeah. If your Notre Dame safety was able to pick McCord off, that's another win against Ohio State last year.
Yeah, so I mean, Notre Dame is, I think I just had it up, but Notre Dame's minus 165 to make the playoff. Penn State's minus 130. Like these are juicy plays, and it's just the new reality of a 12-team playoff.
Well, that's a perfect segue. Nice work by the gang here. Summer Ball Episode 1, all things college football. Joe Tansey, Mark Henry Jr., Ryan Beef Coyle. I am Sean Brace. Beef, over to you. Let's talk some playoffs with the 12 teams there. I got DraftKings Sportsbook open in front of me. Of course, you got the top dogs to win it all. You got Georgia, you got Ohio State, Texas, Oregon, Alabama, Ole Miss, LSU, Florida State, Notre Dame, Michigan, Penn State, Missouri. So with that being said, those top 12 teams, I'm sure to make the playoffs on the yes, it's going to cost you a couple bucks to make that wager. I'm looking for, and I know everybody else out there is probably looking for a big payday, but I'm looking for a long shot. I'm looking for a team that's under the radar, or maybe that isn't as obvious for everybody out there to make the playoffs on the yes and the no on DraftKings Sportsbook. Beef, I'm starting with you on this one. Give us a team.
All right, so you're asking for a long shot here. I'll give you a
long shot isn't those top 12 teams. So, let's not get carried away with the term here. I'm not looking for a 65-1, but I'm looking for somebody other than those top 12 teams that are currently listed to win it all this year. And we could stop at Missouri. Anybody after Missouri, even though I do like Tennessee's quarterback a lot. Go ahead, though.
All right. Well, if we're shrinking it down, then I'll go with Kansas State. I think they're plus 250 right now. A really weak Big 12 now, obviously with Texas and Oklahoma leaving. I kind of like their setup with the way that they're built. Avery Johnson at quarterback, from what I've been hearing this offseason, people are really, really high on his game. It seems like he's going to be a pretty electrifying player. That Big 12 is super weak. I was even seeing, and I know he's a Colorado guy, but Joel Klatt saying he thinks Colorado could compete. I don't know if he's going up there with a straight face and saying that, or just because he's a Colorado alum.
That's called bias.
Yeah. But I'm saying, like, if you're even trying to advocate for that at all in that Colorado team that I'm expecting to be a 5-6 win team, that Big 12 is going to be super weak this year. So Kansas State there at plus 250. I think they're the best team. And I guess I'll give my long shot. I'll go with Nebraska at 15-1. Looking at their schedule, I think they start out 7-0 going into the Ohio State game. They could have some up and downs with a freshman quarterback, but I'm never going to bet against Matt Rule at the college level and turning something around. I think that they were actually the only team, maybe it was like one of two or one of three, but I thought I heard they were the only team that didn't lose any players this offseason to the transfer portal. So talk about roster retention there, bring in the number one quarterback from this high school class. And like I said, the schedule sets up nicely to go 7-0 into Ohio State. After or going into the Ohio State game is where it gets tough. Ohio State, UCLA, USC, Wisconsin, Iowa. But Wisconsin, Iowa, UCLA, USC, those could all be coin flip games. So Nebraska at 15-1, I'm buying into them. And if it's not this year, look for it to be next year, because I think this could be kind of like a stepping stone if they just find their way to being maybe like that 11th or 12th team.
Beef, back to you, just as far as the number one quarterback that Matt Rule got out of this class. Is he expected to start day one? A little bit more on him, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, it's Dylan Raiola. It sounds like he is going to be the day one starter. Family ties, I believe it was his uncle, a legendary
Dominic.
Yeah, lineman there at Nebraska before my time, but was committed to Georgia. It seemed like he was locked in there, and then he flipped his commitment pretty late in the process, and it sounds like he's going to be getting the ball there from day one. I don't know if Jeff Sims is still there, but if so, that's his only competition. He was terrible last year. But it sounds like they're kind of rolling out the red carpet, giving him the ball, and basically, you're our guy for the next 3 years. If you want to be, go and make the most of it.
15-1, Joe Tansey on the yes on DraftKings Sportsbook. Where are you at as far as a dark horse team that's going to make the playoffs this year?
It's not even on the. It's not even listed.
Ooh, whoa! This is calling his shot. We're going to cut this.
Temple
We're going to
out?
replay this in January. What do we got?
Oklahoma State.
OK State. Not even listed.
We talk about teams that are 10-2, 9-3 consistently. What's Mike Gundy's career like? What's his career known for? Coming up just short of the playoff. Now, I mean, he'll probably Oklahoma State will probably finish 12th in the rankings now because that's just how things work. But I mean, the best returning running back in college football is Ollie Gordon, and we're talking about a Big 12 here that is probably going to be consistently inconsistent. Is going to essentially take on everything that the Pac-12 was because of the chaotic nature of these teams. And if we're not thinking there's a top dog in the Big 12, well, I think there's a Kansas State. Yeah. I think Utah. I don't even need to know who's on Utah's roster. I just know Kyle Whittingham's going to get them to 8 or 9 wins. So I think if Utah's on the board at plus 250 to make the playoff, that I would have no problem placing. But if we're talking about teams with just pure consistency in the 8-9 win range, and we're expanding out to a 12-team playoff, and you have the best running back in college football back on your roster, I mean, why shouldn't Oklahoma State be in the conversation? If we're throwing darts for a long shot, they're not going to win anything. But to make the playoff,
all you got to do is win the conference and you get in, right?
All you got to do is finish probably second in the Big 12 and get in.
I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah,
because we're gonna do four. We're gonna do 4 SEC. We're gonna do 4 Big 10, and then there's one group of 5. Let's say conservatively maybe 3. Like let's just say 3 SEC, 3 Big 10 to start. Okay. The ACC and Big 12 probably aren't getting more than 2.
Definitely not.
They're not getting more than 2 seats at the table. But if you finish top 2 in the Big 12 and you have 10 wins, there's a high chance you're getting in, right?
I almost think it's going to need to be a scenario with the Big 12 or the ACC where like the 11-win team loses in the conference championship, so the other team kind of backs their way in while they get to sneak. I almost think it would have to be a specific scenario, but no, I mean the Big 12 is where you're looking 100%
right
with any of these for sure.
Interesting.
Actually, I wouldn't. I would add the ACC to that just because of what we're looking at in terms of listing. Florida State's plus 130 to make the college football playoff, and Clemson's plus 185 to make the college football playoff. I think we're all in agreement they're the 2 best programs in the ACC. I mean, the newcomers aren't going to do anything. I think SMU could be frisky, but that's really it. Cal and Stanford don't really bring anything to the table. So if you're looking for like how this thing may play out, I mean, if you project Florida State or Clemson to be the ACC champion and they're plus money to make the playoff, I mean, even both of them, just based on their track records, are worth it. I mean, who else in the ACC scares you?
No one. Cam Ward. Right. I hate Miami.
Yeah. Great call on the team. OK State. Problem is there is no number on it, so I got to hit the people up at DraftKings. We got a yes on this. We need an yes. If you had to take a guess, just simply going by some of the other teams that are in that ballpark, in that conversation as OK State is in your mind, Joe, you got a number on a yes?
I mean, they're plus 1,200 to win the Big 12, so gonna go. You can work off of that. I mean, Utah is the favorite to win the Big 12 plus 330. They're plus 250 to make the playoff. So I mean, it's a high number.
Yeah.
For reference, I could kind of help out, I think, a little bit with what the number could be, because I had 2 teams that I kind of went back and forth with, and they have the same number. They're both from the Big 12. And the first one's Kansas. That's my favorite one. Their win total's 8.5. They're at plus 600 to make the playoff. They avoid Utah they avoid Texas Tech, they avoid Oklahoma State, and they avoid Arizona. Those are the 4 other highest win totals in the Big 12. They don't play any of those teams. They play Kansas State, but they avoid a nice bit of the best teams in the Big 12. Really easy schedule. Jalen Daniels is coming back. He was obviously hurt last year. It really killed their season, but they still went 9-4. Jason Bean did step into a role there. Jalen Daniels would have to stay healthy, but when he's out there, he is electric. The health is definitely a concern, but I also looked at Arizona at 6-1. It's hard to. I just don't know enough about their coach yet. He came over from San Jose State. I was a big Jed Fish guy who went to Washington, but I think his name's Brent Brennan, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Brent Brennan is the new coach at Arizona from San Jose State. It's hard for me to endorse betting on a new coach to make the playoff in his first year, but the Big 12 is wide open. And Noah Fafita, honestly, if you told me there were 5 quarterbacks better in the country than Noah Fafita, I might disagree. He might be a top 5 guy going into this year for me. He was so good to end last year, and maybe he's being propped up a little bit because he has one of the best receivers in the country in Teddy-Ora McMillan, and they went to high school together. A really cool story there. But Arizona, but they're both 6-1. Arizona's win total 7.5. Kansas is 8.5. OK State 7.5. I imagine OK State's probably in that 6, 7, 800 range.
Excellent. Noah is 30-1 on the Heisman Trophy watch here on DraftKings Sportsbook. Oh, by the way, Riley Leonard in front of him at 28-1.
Well, he gets the Notre Dame boost.
That's right. Mark Henry Jr., a little smile there on the way.
Yeah,
out.
I mean, Tansey hates Notre Dame. It's fine.
No.
Drew
Drew
Aller's moving mountains over there.
Whoa, okay, all right. Let's clarify one thing. There's only one college program I hate, and it's Duke basketball.
Nice.
I just don't think Riley Leonard is going to be a godsend for Notre Dame football.
I think he's gonna be
Big difference there, buddy.
We shall see.
Really good. Don't buddy me, pal.
We got.
Hey, you should know by now. I don't have any rooting interest in college football.
He's gonna be his college football consumption is going to take a little hit this fall too. Congratulations to Joe and his lovely wife Allie on the announcement of a baby girl coming our way. A baby girl, Tansey. Joe, tell you what, man. I hope
just in time so she can not pay attention to Penn State's impending disappointment in November.
Yes, exactly. So college football is going to take a little bit of a hit this fall, but you know what? In the beginning, you don't leave the house, so it might work out even better for you.
It's the most wonderful time of the year.
Damn right. Hey, boys, excellent stuff all the way around. We had a lot that we didn't get to, of course, but this is just episode 1 of Summer Ball. We got a long way to go. We got 81 days until this bad boy gets kicked off once again in Ireland. Who we got? Georgia Tech and who?
Florida State.
Florida State. Wow. All right. A little bit better than Navy and Notre Dame. That's for sure.
Can I just stick this out there in the universe now?
Go.
Ollie Gordon at plus 7,500 to win the Heisman. I'm just going to throw that out there. He's the best running back in college football. If he stays healthy, he's going to lead the FBS in rushing.
Anybody else got a number on a player here that they want to toss out?
Just because I just mentioned Okie State.
75-1. I'm on that train.
I'm gonna throw one out. I'm gonna give it to, and it is pending if he wins the job, because I know he's got a couple 5-stars competing with him. But Miller Moss at USC in the bowl game last year, 372 yards and 6 touchdowns, and Lincoln Riley has produced Caleb Williams, Kyler Murray, and Baker Mayfield, all his Heisman. And I believe it was every quarterback he's had has at least been a finalist for the Heisman. So if this guy gets the start, he's going to have the chance to put up numbers. We saw it in a small sample size, but 40-1, you got some fun money laying around. Put that in the air as well.
I'd also make a case for Emeka Egbuka at plus 12,000.
Jeez, now we're cooking with Crisco. I love it. Good numbers. Mark Henry Jr., do you have a name you want to toss in there for the Heisman watch here on June the 4th? I love it.
Jalen Daniels I already mentioned him at 35-1. That's interesting to me. This is just like a total shot in the dark. I don't really believe in this, but Grayson McCall at NC State, that could be interesting. Plus 1,100 or plus 11,000. I mean,
yeah, 1,100.
Yeah, 1,100. That wouldn't be interesting at all. By the way, I will just my one last parting shot. Will Howard, who Joe Tansey thinks is going to get benched by September, is 4th in Heisman odds. I'll just throw that out there.
Didn't say anything about
I'm
that.
joking.
I just said I don't like him.
But he does nothing for you. He's 4th in Heisman odds.
It's because he's the quarterback for Ohio State.
It has a part to do with it. For sure.
That has everything to do with
He's
it.
the quarterback at Ohio State for a reason, is what I would say.
Excellent.
I'll throw 2 quick more darts at you.
Jackson,
Cade Klubnik's plus 5,000. They're gonna be in contention for the ACC and win a lot of games, and he's way better than any quarterback they've had there. Luther Burden at Missouri at plus 8,000, arguably the best wide receiver in the country. And there was one more that stood out. Michigan State won't be any good, but if they are, Aiden Childs. We talk about transfer quarterbacks that are going to make an impact. Aiden Childs moving from Oregon State to Michigan State with Jonathan Smith, the head coach from the Beavers, going to the Spartans. It's a super duper long shot because they might not be good, but he's incredibly talented and probably the best talent on that list. Deep down.
People out there, if you're listening, watching, all the above, do yourself a favor and fire up DraftKings and throw $1 or $2 on some of those names with those price tags attached to it. You're invested. It's something to pay attention to. It's a fun wager. And again, we're not talking about, $50 on a play here, $25. We're talking about a couple bucks here. And with those numbers attached to it, man, it's something that you want in your pocket as the college football season rolls on. Excellent stuff, boys. Only episode 1. We'll be back next Tuesday night, and we're going to get a little bit more in detail, a little bit more in depth. If you have a question out there on anything college football for the big brains, feel free to hit us up on all things socials at Fox Sports The Gambler, or even hit me up personally at Sean_Brace. For Mark Henry Jr., Joe Tansey, Ryan Beef, Coyle, I am Sean Brace. This has been episode 1 of Summer Ball, all things college football.